You are listening to Breaking the Waves, conversations about the Dutch pandemic. My name is Matt Cornell, and I started this podcast to be an English language resource that takes a critical look at Dutch coronavirus policy. Today, we're going to look specifically at the role of dance music culture. My guest today is Axmed Maxamed. Axmed is a queer diasporic Somali activist, organizer, and music nerd. He was born in Hammer, Somalia, where he spent his early years until his family had to flee during the Civil War and ended up in the Netherlands. He spent his formative years in Breda in the south of the Netherlands until he moved to Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, Axmed co-founded Dance with Pride, an initiative which aims to reunify dance music with its queer roots and has been raising money for grassroots queer initiatives. Together with Ladan Mandik, he started working on Queer Somali Pasts and Presents, a storytelling and archival research project which will focus on the lives of queer Somalis in the diaspora and Somalia, both in the present day and in the past. Axmed addresses systemic inequalities in Dutch society and in the underground dance music scene, which paved the way for harmful practices such as cultural appropriation and the whitewashing of Black music. Our conversation was recorded on June 23rd of 2021. Maybe you could tell me, I know that you're an organizer with the queer refugee community here, and more particularly with Somali queer migrants. Could you talk a little bit about how the pandemic, and especially how the Dutch response to the pandemic, has affected the communities that you work with?
When I say the Somali queer community, it's actually global. It's not necessarily within the only within the Dutch borders. And it has had a very big impact on them because of the kind of work that the people do, and also I'm in touch with people that are in a country like in one of them is in Kampala, and they're waiting to be is it called repatriate? To the US, and then everything is on hold. So now they have to be there longer, which means, and then the US government doesn't provide any help, so which means they have to survive being there. So there's it impacts people on so many levels, which is unthinkable, to be honest.
Specifically, though, in the Netherlands, and I know that the Netherlands doesn't collect, for instance, like ethnic and racial demographics, right? So it's often hard to pin this down, but it does seem like Corona has disproportionately affected people with a migration background and refugees. Can you talk a little bit about what you know about that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, in the US, they do have those numbers, and the reason why that is, as we know, is also similar in the Netherlands because of most of them are working class or even poorer communities, or they have jobs where they cannot do from home. And so on. So people and work in hospitals and so they always people of color and people from migrant backgrounds, they all usually have they do essential work, and that is why it has impacted them impacted them so much, and because of the fact that they do essential work, a lot of racial abuse comes with it as well. Like, we actually did a survey about the impact that it had on people of color, Black people and people of color, but then the survey couldn't be finished because of other reasons, unfortunately. But some of the answers that we got was also a lot about the heightened racial abuse that people received during the pandemic. Because if you work at the Albert Heijn, for example, and then you tell people to wear a mask or people to social distance, then they will go off on you, and then you use racial slurs and so on. So, or if you work in service work, a lot of people from migrant background have those kind of works. And then also recently, there was, around the middle of the pandemic, I think there were Polish or Romanian East European workers that all got COVID because they were working somewhere where there wasn't, the housing was very bad. Yes. So there is it has impacted communities that are already marginalized even more. And that is something that we've seen, during this pandemic from the beginning, actually.
Right. And I was speaking a few weeks ago with Amrish Baiju from the Red Team, who's an epidemiologist. And he was saying that, for instance, the Dutch government really failed to very early on, like reach out to migrant communities, also to publish, for instance, information in languages other than Dutch about the disease, and that this was basically a kind of form of institutional neglect, right?
And the work that he's doing and others, I actually quote tweeted him today, because they do amazing work, and that's true, because people of color, Black people, and people from migrant backgrounds, they are not a priority for this government or this demissionaire regering. As for those that don't understand what that means, the government has resigned in January, and then there were elections in March, but there hasn't been a new government formed. But until there's a new government, then the former government that resigned will continue to do the work, and usually they won't make new decisions. But because of the pandemic, they are making decisions and allocating hundreds of millions to test for toegang and all these other fucked up initiatives. And that is just
It's funny. I think that the English term for that they're using is caretaker cabinet.
Okay.
Which is kind of a strange term, because caretaker seems to imply something nurturing or protective.
Exactly.
And it seems to be the opposite. Yeah,
absolutely the opposite of that.
Well, before we talk about some of that other stuff, I mean, I know that you've been quite critical of Rutte in particular for kind of past policies and behaviors towards refugees and migrants. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I actually wrote it, mentioned it in a piece that I wrote for Dweller about the Dutch elections, and I mentioned that in, I think it was 2007, before he was a prime minister, but he was convicted by a judge for ethnic profiling of people who are Somali Dutch people. And because he said that they needed to be checked more because of fraud, he said that they would be more fraudulent and so on. And then the judge, he was convicted of racial profiling. And that is the same things that are now happening with that just came out, the toeslag scandal for the child welfare scandal. It's exactly what he was doing in 2007. But just on a broader scale. And again, also in their during the elections, in their in their program, they had a whole part was about how it's important that there's going to be blacklists where people who are fraudulent are going to be put on, and then this list will be shared between government agencies. So even though at the same time the government resigned because of the welfare scandal, it's still in the VVD. The biggest party is still in their program to do exactly the same thing that they say that they took their responsibility for. So it is part of and it's not only VVD, it's part of this whole system.
Yeah.
And now they're they say that they took responsibility, but we all know that's not the reason that they, which I also talk about in the article. It's just they just didn't want this hanging over their head during the campaign for the elections, because they know as soon as they resign, then the media will be like, "Oh, you did a great job," and that's what it is, and no one mentioned it anymore.
It came out, I think, just a couple of days ago that not only did they have this profiling happening with the benefits scandal, they also had young people, like minors, on a tax fraud blacklist, and they sent letters to these people, like literally children, accusing them of defrauding the tax.
And we only know now because they had to the Belastingdienst, the tax office of the Netherlands. They had to send everyone who was on these lists. They had to send them a letter telling them that they were on the list, and they had to be according to the privacy law. And that's the only reason why people are aware of it now, because I kept on seeing people sharing the letters that they got and had no idea that they were on these lists. But then the question is then, okay, this is now happening, but what are we doing to prevent from this happening again? Nothing. Uh, um, Even worse, they want to continue doing this. They, on the one hand, they want to say that they admit that it was wrong, but then continue to do the same thing. That's why I'm happy that at least there is Bain who is addressing these things for the first time ever. And yeah, so there's a glimmer of hope in this white supremacist imperialist country.
Yeah, indeed. And for people who are new to this podcast, or maybe who don't live in the Netherlands, Bain has a representative now in the parliament in Sylvana Simons, and not only bringing up these issues of institutional racism, but also the only member of parliament to come out and criticize the herd immunity policy, because previously no one was talking about this.
They are, and also when it comes to Palestine, they're the only party that is actually standing with the Palestinian people. It's so wild to see Sylvana and the things that the party is doing, and everyone is so surprised. It's like there was no left before that, to be honest, because none of these parties were addressing the issues that for us is very normal. It's very normal to address this, but it wasn't being discussed in the parliament, and now it is being discussed. So yeah, that's great.
Let's talk a little bit about the underground dance music scene, which you're very active in. First of all, just tell me a little bit about Dance with Pride, the organization that you work.
Yeah, so Dance with Pride was founded by Aura, a friend of mine, and myself in 2017. And the reason why it actually was founded was because Dekmantel, that happens during Pride weekend, or they decided to organize their event or their festival during Pride weekend. But they were not making any connection between Pride and their festival, even though the music that they play is the history that it has, Black and Latino queer, and so on. So initially why Dance with Pride started was as a T-shirt action. So Aura is a designer, so she designed these T-shirts, and then we were gonna kind of like invade the festival, ask friends of ours who were playing to wear them, and other people that were attending the festival also they were, and so that was the idea. And then when we were planning all of this, I found out about this initiative called Queer Welfare that supports queer refugees, and I wanted to offer my services as an interpreter for free. And then they told me that they are not continuing their work because they don't have enough funding. And Aura and I decided to connect, to ask people, instead of just giving away the T-shirts, that was the idea, to ask them to donate to Queer Welfare project. And for the first, and then that Pride weekend, we also did an impromptu Pride party. And then there we, the funds that we raised there went to Project Queer Welfare as well. And then from there on, every event we did, the T-shirts that was sold went to either Project Queer Welfare or similar initiatives that are for and by mostly, or are run by people of color, and then supporting queer people and mostly queer refugees. And if we did something somewhere else, for example, in Berlin, we did something, and in Leipzig. And there, then it went to a local initiative that is similar to the kind of initiative that we gave money to. So that's kind of what Dance with Pride is. And we also organize panel talks, DJ workshops, and all that kind of things.
But it really started from this idea that dance music culture, going back to disco, at least, I guess, came from a queer and Black and brown music scene, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And then that became whiter and straighter in EDM culture.
Yeah, and especially in Europe, like when it came, and that's something that, and that's something that we wanted. Like the tagline of Dance with Pride was also the reunifying dance music and queer culture, and that is something that that was very important to us, and that's something that we try to continue to do it with all the events and all the things that we organize.
Could you talk a little bit about how Amsterdam or the Netherlands dance music scene responded to the pandemic?
Very badly. something that people sometimes forget is that nothing exists in a vacuum. So they are the dance music scene or whatever. It's part of this society that just wants to ignore this pandemic, that wants to act as if everything is fine and nothing is happening. And that's why the government also called it intelligent lockdown, because of course the Dutch are much better than everyone else. And that mindset also continues in dance music scene everywhere in society. And the same structural and problems that are in broader society are also in place in dance music. So especially when the whole uprising last year in June happened, like there was literally no platform that was actually addressing anything in the music scene. And that's only when they got called out, Dekmantel, the school, that's only when they started doing things. But then it's all very much reactionary, and also very much wanting to be doing something that they actually don't believe in, and they don't want to do it. And it shows on every level. And and then what happened with this?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the uprising against racism and police violence?
Yeah, which also, it started in the US, but then of course in the Netherlands, we also have our own police brutality cases. And so it was happening all over the world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, all these platforms were just sharing the new mix that is happening, or this is going on here, we're organizing this, we have, rightfully people, not a few people, myself including, address these things. And that's when they decided, we need to do this, and then doing very last minute things, but then at the same time acting as if it was something that was already planned, and just being shitty all around.
Yeah, a lot of them sort of playing catch up. I saw this in universities too, universities issuing statements about Black Lives Matter because students were saying, what's going on here? Yeah.
Yeah, and you see the same things happening, and it's actually so boring, were it not that it harms people, the fact that these things are not addressed. But the same things keep on happening. Like there is nothing innovative about racism or about these. It's the same things that are happening everywhere.
Yeah, just
in a slightly different way.
Some people have observed, though, that in the US context, those uprisings were at least in part motivated by the disparities of the pandemic, and that activists were making connections between structural racism and in health and public health and jobs and stuff, as well as police violence. Do you think that piece has been well discussed in Europe, the health side of this?
Not as much. No. I don't think it has. But again, it is happening here as well. But it's just not something that those connections are made. Of course, some people are making those connections and are addressing it, but it doesn't get the platform that it gets in the US, for example. But that's also because the Netherlands specifically, since we're talking about the Netherlands, they're still in denial about their colonial and slavery and their destructive history. They're still in denial. I don't know if you saw the fact that Ministry of Defense edited a Wikipedia page of a film that that wasn't even that, like, people were actually critical of the film, that it wasn't critical enough, and even that is too much. So this government or this country is still in denial with this Zwarte Piet and so on. Things are changing a bit, but they are very much lagging behind compared to other places.
Yeah, I guess a week from today will be Ketikoti, which will be the commemoration of the end of slavery. And as far as I know, there was supposed to be a formal apology from the city of Amsterdam last year that then I think has been moved to this year.
And that is what the problem is, and that's like the main thing, and the way that the Dutch government treats Aruba, Saint Martin, Curacao, and so on, it's abhorrent. It's really, 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 terrible. And Saint Martin, for example, filed a complaint in the UN against the Netherlands, and then the Netherlands stopped the the support that they were giving them, because how dare you be critical of the monarchy or the Dutch government. So it's all in all terrible.
The first big event that I went to after the first wave or lockdown was the BLM protest in Amsterdam, which was one of the biggest protests I've ever seen in this country.
In the Netherlands. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And of course, the official response was, for the first time ever, the city government said, "Oh well, people should be careful." They were even saying that maybe some people should go in quarantine for 2 weeks after the protest.
Yeah, I actually did a segment about that for radio, because I was one of the people that actually decided on my own that I was gonna self-quarantine for 2 weeks, and then one of, I think, Radio 1 or whatever, they interviewed me about why I was doing it and so on. But of course they jumped on it, and they were attacking Femke Halsema, the mayor of Amsterdam, who is someone that I'm not a fan of. But in this case, they were attacking her because of she allowed this to happen, and so it was very clear that the reason why they were doing it, because something like this never happened. But at the same time, then the question is, what will this lead to? Material change? Would this lead to structural change? And this country, of course, as you know, they're not great. They're not a fan of actually researching these things. But in the US, there's this podcast called Code Switch. I don't know if you know, and they had an episode where they talked, where they were in conversation with two researchers, talking about whether it actually had impact on people, on white people, after what happened during the Black Lives Matter movement last year. And then they saw that it actually the fact that whether white people continue to push for change, it actually went down from where it was before 2020, June 2020. So it's even lower than it was before. And what there was a line that one of the researchers said, which I don't remember exactly, but he said something along the lines of, for a lot of white people, the books that they read started in the shelf or something like that, and then ended up on the couch. So that's like their whole, it didn't go further. And that's why it's important for those that do understand, for those that do see that white people need to stand up and to push for change and become actively anti-racist and so on, that they need to continue doing more work, and especially in this country, but everywhere. Yeah.
The other protest that happened later that summer that I want to ask you about was one called was basically organized by nightclubs and music promoters. And they gathered in Museumplein, calling for nightclubs to be reopened, and at least one of their proposals was that they should be reopened without social distancing or masks for anyone under 40. I at first thought, okay, this is just like Paradiso and Melkweg, but then I looked at which organizations were endorsing this, and some of them were very, surprising. You wouldn't expect them to show up on a list of basically like pro-capitalist,
Well, like which can you name an example?
Detroit was on there. They were saying we should reopen.
Well, Detroit is also
some other promoters, and some other
Again, we come back to the fact that the nightlife is also part of society, and it's a lot of people, like those people that were at that demonstration, they were there together with Nazis and far right who actually organized, co-organized these events. And that's when you see the intersection of how white people kind of accept a lot of things as long as it that they can benefit from it, and it doesn't they will use their whiteness to create alliances with people that they would actually say that they're not on the same page with, but because they have similar goal, which is like opening things up, then they don't mind forming alliances. And the thing about place like the Truth is it's also a place where people are, it's like this old school mindset of like freedom is very important, and that's also a very Dutch mentality of what they think is freedom is actually not what most people would say is freedom. And that is something that is also a big problem at the Truth. Like I stopped going there as well because of racial abuse that friends of mine experienced, but they still have this mindset of, oh, no, we're not racist, you know. So it's a very Dutch and very white Dutch problem, because they just don't want to accept that what the realities are for some people, for minorities and people of color. And
you really nailed something that I've noticed also, because I was running a cultural venue within a legalized squat, and I know that in the squat and legalized squat scene, there was also a lot of like anti-lockdown mental, or I put lockdown in quotes, right? We didn't really have a real lockdown, but there was a lot of attitudes that didn't really seem any different from right-wing or capitalist responses to the pandemic. And it was this idea that people really valued some abstract idea of freedom over any kind of collective solidarity.
And also this this guy Engel, what was his name? The
Willem
leader
Engel,
of Willem Engel. He's like this hippie dude, and so there was an actual really clear intersection between Nazis and far right, and people who are anarchists and hippies, and white anarchists and hippies, I should say. And because they have similar goal of like, no one should tell us what to do, even if it means people will die. No, it doesn't matter. It's just this individualism mindset, which is a very Calvinistic and very Dutch way of thinking, of like, if I feel something is preventing me from doing whatever the fuck I want, then I feel that like I'm oppressed, and I'm gonna go against that.
I want to ask you about the school. What happened there?
It was actually what we were talking about earlier, about they were critiqued because they were silent about the Black Lives Matter movement, and then they tried to do some things last minute, do a post and so on, and then more critique came, and then that just continued because all of their statements was just shit. And then an event that was going to happen there, a fundraiser by XXX Amsterdam, shout out to Serene, Hell, and Liza, who organized the event. They moved their event from the school to another club, and so the critique grew and grew. Like myself, I've been critical of that space, and I've been boycotting it for years, but people just didn't want to listen to me. And also a few other people have been critical of them because, and then they decided to do a podcast, which no one asked for. And basically like everything that I've been saying came out during that podcast. They thought that they were going to redeem themselves during that podcast. And D Dix actually wrote, DJ D Dix, shout out to her. She wrote an amazing piece for Dweller about like dissecting the whole podcast. And to my knowledge, she's the only DJ that accepted her own, that she was also part of the reason why this club could promote itself as this inclusive, diverse space when they were harming people of color, Black people, queer people, and so on. Because the fact that she played there, then they used that as she's a Black queer woman as a way of saying, I'm not, we're great. And that is something that they've been doing since the day they opened their doors. And that's something that I've been addressing for so long. And even in her piece, she mentioned that a queer person whose opinion she trusts. So that's me. So I told her I'm not going to come, but I said, if I want you to feel safe. And then she told me that she had a friend of hers who's also Black was going to go with her. And then I felt like she's going to be safe. So that's fine. But other than that, like during the podcast, it became very clear that it's how toxic the space was and how the person who did the HR, that she was hiding all these racist experiences that people had. And the report would go to her, and then she would discuss it with the people from, like Luke, from people from the programmer and so on. But they didn't do anything with those reportings, and also other physical abuse and so on. And in the comments, someone also commented that they were physically abused by some of the one of the programmers, and then they called him a liar, and then that also. So it really became very clear how toxic and harmful that place has been. And I also experienced racism there, and also from this same person, Lon, who was the HR, and all of these things came out, and it became very clear that this was how toxic and harmful that space was. And then they said that they were gonna think and do something different, but then they decided they were going to close, which was about the pandemic as well, because they were closed anyway and they were not going to open. But then that kind of like morphed into this whole thing of like, they have been canceled, so therefore they have closed. And a lot of people were blaming me, which I don't care. I really don't care. You can blame me if you want to, but at the end of the day, they were not making any money. So staying open would meant that the owners had to pay the people that were working. So the owners actually did what was best for them, is fire everyone and say that the club is closed. And now they still deleted the comments on their Instagram, and then they use the Instagram to sell their merch and to promote their restaurant and so on. So the same people that owned it are still making money, and they are still own the space, but they, for the outside, they kind of like quote unquote took responsibility, which is also something that happens a lot by that white people do a lot. And when they get criticized, they ignore until they cannot ignore anymore, and then usually they then say, okay, we disband. The same happened with this agency in Berlin called I don't know, Odd Fantastic. I don't know if you followed that.
No.
Because they got critique as well, and they ignored, and then when they couldn't, then they disbanded, so it doesn't exist anymore. So instead of actually taking responsibility and doing something with the critique that you get, they then decide to kind of like call it quits and say, this is us taking our responsibility. The same with the Dutch government. It's all the same. Like, instead of actually doing the work to make material change, you'll ignore as long as you can, and when you cannot ignore anymore, then you just throw your hands up and say, okay, I've given up.
Right. Or you rebrand or something.
Rebrand. That's definitely, I mean, I'm expecting this club to rebrand as well with other people and saying, no, we're good now. We're great. The same with Rela Radio. They don't exist anymore, but some of the people are starting something else on their own. But how is this going to be different when you start something new? How are you going to do it when you haven't taken responsibility, when you were critiqued? How are people supposed to believe now that you're going to do things differently?
In your opinion, what would that look like? Would it look like having more non-white people in leadership positions? Is it program? Is it administration?
It's all of it.
All of it. Okay. All
of it. Yeah. And the thing is, I personally have given up trying to make white spaces inclusive, because it's just not going to happen as long as the people that are making decisions are people who are vested in white supremacy, that don't understand their own whiteness, they don't understand how structural systemic racism and so on works. And the thing is, they can read all the books that they want, but if they're not actually doing that in their daily life, then nothing is gonna change. Because that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of people that I also have been friends with that have read all the books and so on, but when it comes to like everyday life, they're not doing what they are reading. And that's something that also Bell Hooks says. She says, Bell Hooks said, theory is not inherently revolutionary or liberatory. It will only have that. It will only have that effect if you put your theorizing towards it. Yeah. So if you don't do that, then you've just read something and then you continue to do the same thing that you were doing before. And if you are from the dominant, for the hegemonic group,
Yeah.
then it's easier, of course, to just accept the way things are and move along and manipulate things where you can, by using phrases from Audre Lorde and so on, and presenting as someone who actually is doing the work. You can be even more, people who have read these works are even worse in some ways, because they know and they're still not doing what they have read and say that they've learned.
Very similar to what you just said earlier about getting the book from the shelf to the couch, right?
Yeah.
So like it probably have to include myself. A lot of white people will make a self-criticism or express some sort of guilt about their complicity in certain systems, and that's like supposed to be enough, right? Oh,
exactly.
That I know that I have privilege is enough, right? But actually, it's what comes next that matters, I think, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And I found the phrase, it's by Professor Hakeem Jefferson, and what he said was, a lot of the racial reckoning from white people has been feeling bad about being white, engaging in some quote unquote anti-racist behaviors and something and things like that. But a lot of this reckoning is starting at the bookshelf and ending on the couch. Yeah.
Ouch.
Very much on point of what happened in the last yeah. And then also there is like this a response to an essay by Tom Hanks. I don't know if you Tom Hanks wrote an essay for the New York Times, where he basically says that it's important to for films to actually like to not just center whiteness and so on. And then there was a response to his essay by Eric Deggans, a Black journalist from NPR. And his response was basically, well, Tom Hanks needs to start with himself. Like, he's not only an actor, he's a producer, he's a film director, and so on. He has the power to do something about it. So instead of, as white people, saying these are the problems, especially people who have so much sway, so much power, no, you don't. First of all, you need to accept your own part of this. That's also very important to say, which Tom Hanks doesn't really do. And also say what you're going to do to actually change, because you have the power, you have the possibility to do something about it. And of course, the journalist that wrote that got so much backlash. Because how dare you critique our the favorite actor of everyone,
America's dad.
Yeah.
America's dad.
And also then you have the white liberals who are, and of course also the right, who are like, he's at least trying. Nothing will be enough. People are that's the thing, like white people do like the bare minimum, and of course they want cookies. They want people to say, oh, look at you, you're doing great. And that's not gonna
ironically, it was Tom Hanks getting COVID, that probably put that on Americans' radar. In March of last year, that was the moment. So we know that he's a powerful symbol. And
and the same with what happened. It's not the same, but I don't know if you saw, also connected to nightlife, definitely, about Buttons, this queer party that happens in Berlin, that they decided they're not going to work with About Blank anymore because of their anti-Deutsch and very much against the Palestinian people. And they put out a statement saying that they are not going to work with them anymore. But they've been working with them for so long, and they've known this for so long. And it's just, I just miss that acknowledgement of the fact that they have known this for so long. And then they say they've been having conversations, but this has been going on for years. It was much more convenient for you to sever your ties with them now than it was before. Just admit that, and that's just that part of honesty is what I miss. Even when a statement is good, then it misses that most of the times. Just being honest about how that it was comfortable for you to not engage or to not actually do the work that is necessary to push for radical change.
I wanted to ask you about. I know you've been critical of plague raves, illegal raves. What are plague raves, and who's organizing them?
I honestly didn't really address plague raves as much, to be honest, because it just felt like there were enough people addressing them, like Matisse and other people. So I was just resharing that. But essentially, what it comes down to is that there were these big parties being organized during the pandemic and without masks and so on. And it was mostly big name DJs that were doing this and then flying all over the world, going to East African countries, for example, and organizing events there, or organizing them in countries where the government is more relaxed when it comes to measurements, which is putting people in the citizens in danger. And they were capitalizing on that, the fact that the governments are more relaxed, even in Italy and so on. And a lot of people have been calling that out rightfully, that they are.
So that specifically refers to legal raves that are happening above board, but of course there have also been a lot of private.
There've also been there've definitely been a lot of and then the phones weren't allowed because at some point they didn't want videos to get outside, but then at the end something comes outside and so on. But there were definitely also illegal ones, but the legal ones are actually the ones that I have been more critical of, which is like the things that are organized, like even by the government, the field lab events kind of thing. So those were the things that I have addressed also in the piece that I wrote. Also happened in the UK, those similar events, organized by Circus. And then I wrote the piece for Jean Hughes, sorry for butchering the name, is Substack called Dangerous, the piece called Dangerous, Irresponsible and Unnecessary. And so I was focusing more on things that are actually legal, quote unquote, and saying how that doesn't, you can elude a responsibility by saying this, the government allows this, so then it's fine.
Let me ask you a little bit about this, because one argument that I've encountered from people in the cultural scene of any kind is that there are some people who don't qualify for structural support. They don't qualify for wage replacement or whatever. People that are paid, black laborers, basically, so that some of these events are ways to get paid for people that are otherwise neglected through the official schemes. What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, the events that I was talking about, it was mostly people who are really rich that were playing there.
Big
so
DJ.
It's definitely not really big DJs, like the Blessed Madonna or whatever she calls herself now, and Richie Ahmed organized it, I think, and then you had like really big name DJs that were playing there.
But wouldn't all of those events require people to do sound and set up equipment? And I mean, these are all people that may have been out of work for the past year and a half. This is not an excuse. I'm just saying this is what.
I understand. And also there were events organized by people that actually needed the money. And like you say, the people that are working there have to do it because they need the money. But you are, by organizing, you are putting them in danger because you want money. So the people that are actually organizing these are not doing it because they want those people to have jobs. No, because they're doing it because they want to make a lot of money. And the thing that specifically when I talk, like people who do the sound and stuff, they're not people who have platforms. But when I talk, like, for example, there are like DJs and that are smaller and that really need the money. I understand, and I don't judge it, but it's important to be honest about it. It's so important to be open about, if you're struggling with this, say it. Because the thing that I miss, especially now with everything opening up in the Netherlands, is everyone is just like acting as if there is no pandemic and as if there was never a pandemic. People are just promoting, or they're actually promoting the fact that there is no going to be social distance. So it's like the other side. They're either ignoring the only thing they'll say is, you have to get tested for entry. That's it. But other than that, it's as if it never existed. And that is the problem, because you
Yeah.
then normalize this idea of like everything is fine now, which what the government is doing.
Yeah.
And that is my problem with this is then you are putting people in harm's way without actually being honest towards them what is happening, because if everyone around you is acting as if nothing is wrong, then you just go along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I have friends in Berlin, and I saw that like last weekend was the first weekend that it was legal in Berlin to dance outside. So they had like dance events outside. And of course, it was 36 degrees and everyone was miserable. But what's striking is this coming Sunday, I think it's this Sunday, dance parties will be legal again in Amsterdam for up to 25,000 people.
Yeah, Friday even. I think Friday. There's like, I saw Grasenoord has like a 40-hour marathon party, and it's wild. It's really, really, and like, and they all using legality as a way to elude responsibility. It's allowed, so all of a sudden everything is fine now, and that is just not the case. And I know there are people that are playing there because they don't have they need the money, and they are going to do, which I understand, and I don't judge them, and I don't but it's important to be honest about the risks. Just be honest about, I have my doubts, I am conflicted about this, but I need the money. Be honest. And that's just not happening. That is really not happening. That's the part that makes me sad in some ways, because those are not people that are thinking about, oh, I want to make a lot of money, because they don't make a lot of money, you know?
Yeah.
And
it also does seem like, though, that a lot of people have bought the misinformation and lies from the government. So, for instance, most people don't seem to understand that this virus is spread by aerosols indoors. So that, for instance, the whole country could be scandalized because the king went and shook someone's hand on a street, which is a very low risk kind of thing to do, right? But dancing indoors is very high risk. And it seems like we're not even having a discussion about harm reduction. Harm reduction would be only outdoor dancing, right? That would be a good compromise, but nobody seems ready to propose something like that.
But also it's I'm not putting this only on I'm definitely putting it on the governments and those that actually make money, but the people that are going, they also share responsibility in it. And it's also important to realize that the Amsterdam, especially the dance music, a lot of people just don't care, and that is a shame, but that is the reality. And something that Matisse said, which is really really important to mention, is that how nightlife and the event sector in general, they could have really pushed for harm reduction ways of opening up more by forcing the government to ramp up certain, like the vaccines, and doing things that actually will help people to help to open up sooner, and working with the government in a way that is going to benefit the general public and their public. But so capitalistic minded that is not their goal. Their goal is just opening up. There are even clubs that are like, you know, and like you've been critical and I've been critical about the opening up, and the fact that these tests that they're doing, the antigen tests, are the latest result. The latest research was that it only catches 50% of the cases that PCR would catch. So saying people get tested before they go, it's just not. It's not a safe way of doing this. But still, there are clubs like PIP and Shelter that I know of. There must be more that are even mad at the government and that are pushing against the testing. They want everyone to go without being tested, even though the testing is already very dangerous. It really shows how people want to ignore the whole pandemic happened or is still happening.
Yeah.
And yeah.
There was
That
an
is
article. There was an article about a week or two ago about the testing, the Testen Vertugang, the testing
yeah,
for entry
yeah,
system, and it said that only 3% of the capacity of this system is being used, because basically they gave venues a choice.
yeah,
You could stick with social distancing, or you can require people to get tested. And most of like the cinemas and theaters and museums said, we don't want to do that. And probably they don't want people to do that because they don't want to remind them
yeah,
that they're at risk during a pandemic. It's the same resistance to masks. It's like, well, if you wear a mask, you're reminding me that I'm at risk, right?
yeah,
You're
yeah,
reminding me
yeah,
that there is a deadly virus circulating.
yeah,
So it seems to be the same thing with testing. If you have to
yeah,
test, it just reminds you, right?
yeah.
So they would rather say, oh yeah, we have this social distancing rule, which nobody really follows, and and leave it
Yeah.
at that.
And as we know, like the clubs are saying, because they want to open full on, so they're like all the clubs have the ones that I've seen at least saying they have it on their website. You have to get tested, but we know for a fact that there will be a lot. Like first of all, the testing, like I just said, the testing is not even
Very
gonna
good.
like
Yeah.
yeah. But in addition to that, if your friend shows up at the door and you're gonna get in, like if the DJ's friend, if the DJ tests positive and they still, or they're not even, it will not be adhered to the whole,
Yeah.
and that's something that the government also knows, because there is no the same as they say. Um, um, the borders are now open. Everyone can come from any country, but some countries you have to quarantine for 10 days. But there is no not that I would say policing is important, but that people should be policed. But there is no, like, no one is checking. So
Sure.
it's all for as we would say in Dutch, for the bühne. For the bühne, that means it's just theatrical.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hygiene theater. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's also really funny. Like, right. I mean, it's not funny. It's very serious. But right now, of course, we're looking at as we're talking today. And of course, this is going to be posted later. But they're estimating that 40% of the cases in Amsterdam are Delta variant.
Yeah.
And they're mostly blaming this right now on young people
Tourists.
going to
Yeah,
Portugal and
yeah,
Spain,
yeah,
which I guess is possible, right? But if you look at the maps of infection rates in the EU, it's just us, Sweden, and to some extent Belgium, that have high rates of corona. Everywhere else is not in the red.
yeah.
So it's very funny that it's always, again, like an external problem. It's always
Yeah.
young
It
people
always has to
somewhere
be.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It always has to be an external problem, because that is how they are socialized, and that's how
Yeah.
that they don't have to take the responsibility for it. It's, again, it also goes deeper. That is the same thing when it comes to the history of slavery, the history of colonialism. They don't want to accept that responsibility. That's why they don't even formally apologize. That is even too much, because that means I'm going to accept that I'm benefiting from something that my ancestors did, which they are, but yeah, don't want to accept that, because it's easier to ignore it and say, no, this didn't happen, this is not my fault, this is
Do you miss dancing?
yeah, I do, but not to the extent that some of my friends do, apparently, because I am what I fell in love with books again during this pandemic, so that really helped me to get through it. And also therapy helped me a lot as well, and I take medications which help me a lot as well. So so all those reasons, I've been okay to be by myself most of the times, which I am. And I understand for some people it's not some people it's difficult, and I understand that, and I don't like but I feel like I can take it, so I'm gonna adhere to these rules as much as possible. And the longer, and I also inform myself. That's something that a lot of people don't do. I know so much about this pandemic and about the COVID-19 now that I could actually give a lecture on something. And also I follow the latest results and how much efficacy a certain vaccine has against a certain variant. So therefore, when I do things, even if I travel, I know how much I'm limiting the risks that I'm putting myself on and also other people on. And that is that also helped me to feel quite okay and relaxed in
Yeah.
many ways, because I know what's happening. I know why things are happening, or at least why I'm doing things, and why I'm not doing certain things. And yeah, and that's been very helpful.
It's been my impression that the people who have a very realistic like survival approach about this pandemic, more often than not have some sort of connection with people in other countries, or they're following international news. Like I've been getting a lot of reality checks from people who live in other places, about, well, is what's going on in Amsterdam normal? Oh no, you're doing it differently.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you have any family? Do you have family in Somalia now? And are you following what's going on with the pandemic there?
I don't. I do have family, but I'm not in touch with them, so I'm not really aware. But I do have some people that I know that are there, and it's especially the last since this year, it hit really hard. Like before that, it didn't. But
Yeah.
like this year, there were in Hamar, the capital, which is known as Mogadishu, but the locals call it Hamar. There were at some points there were like tens of a lot of funerals every day happening. So it was really hit really hard, and but it happened later in the year. But that's the same what's happening like earlier this year. So later during the pandemic, and it's been very difficult for a lot of people. It's been really hard for what at least the people that I've been in touch with, to see how that there is no like here we have we have vaccines, a lot of people are vaccinated and so on, and there is much more difficult. It's going to take much longer, and that is something that is also because of colonial history and how these rich countries that got rich because of their destructive and extortive past, and which is still happening, that have all the vaccines, and other countries that have been exploited for centuries still don't. And it's sad, and it's heartbreaking, and that also makes things even worse. If you look at from, that's also what I said in the piece, that no, in addition to putting people in danger, how can you prioritize the things that opening up and putting people in danger when there's still people dying? And the only reason you can even talk about opening up is the privileges that you have that come from these histories. People don't even want to acknowledge that.
I want to ask you something that comes up a lot in conversations with people, which is that there's this sort of a rhetoric around wanting to return to normal.
Yeah.
And, when I talk to people on this podcast about the different communities or industries that they're involved with, they almost always say, well, normal had some problems. Do you want to return to normal in the dance music scene? And if not, why not?
I mean, the things that we talked about, like when it comes to the school or Dekmantel or all these other, we mentioned these two, but there's like all of them basically. Those things that was normal, like the way they continuously harm people. That was normal, and I definitely don't want to go back to that. But a lot of people, do want to go back to that, because either they benefited from the status quo, or they don't know any better. So that's kind of and something that I am happy about that is happening, which is not happening in Amsterdam, is something that is now only the past month or so, since the atrocities in Palestine, to see finally people initiatives actually addressing the German how German clubs and German society, again, which the clubs don't exist in a vacuum, the people that run the clubs. So that's the German mindset of being supportive of Israel no matter what. And if you're not supportive of Israel, then you're anti-Semitic and so on. And that people are finally kind of standing up to that. So to see that happen, that is something that I feel like is a positive, even though I'm critical of some of the ways that things are done, but that seems like there is some form of change happening. And I also saw a pride that is happening, as a more radical anti-racist centered pride that is going to happen in Berlin, which is a new thing, that something new that I only saw a few days ago. So I do see some things changing, but I don't see that happening in the Netherlands.
Okay, yeah, and
when it comes to nightlife, yeah.
What you said about specifically about the sort of challenge to the anti-Deutsch kind of philosophy there in Germany seems to be part of a larger movement in the consensus on Israel-Palestine, because also in the US, like particularly younger people are less likely to kind of just reflexively support Israel. So I think that that issue is changing basically because of a lot of activism for a long time on the part of
absolutely.
And
there's also a piece that I wrote about the two books. I don't know if you saw, about two books, one by Sarah Schulman and the other one by Dr. Saed Atchan, and I talk in the piece, it's for Dweller, I talk about these two books and how important it is, how much I've learned about these books. And Sarah Schulman's book is from 2012, and she talks about her own awakening when it comes to what is happening to the Palestinian people. And she's a Jewish activist and organizer who's been involved with the ACT UP and the AIDS activism. And she talks about how in her own, even though she was a progressive and activist, her willful ignorance when it comes to what's happening to the Palestinian people is something that she notices with a lot of other progressive people, that they are progressive except when it comes to Palestine.
Yeah.
And that is something that is prevalent in Europe, in the United States. And in the book, of course, she also talks about how this is a fight that's been going on for so long. And that's why in the article I make the case for that we should, like, speaking out is the bare minimum, but we should be on board with the BDS movement, like fully on board. And if you're not well educated enough, that is an excuse that people use a lot, then educate yourself. Because if you don't do that and you stay silent or you keep playing in Israel and so on, then you are siding with the oppressor. And that is just how it is. You cannot say, I don't know enough, it's too complicated. That's a reason that people use. It's too complicated. Yeah. So then I'm not going to do anything. Then you are allowing these atrocities to continue, because it's always when people are silent, it's always the oppressor that benefits from that. And that is that's some of the things that I discuss. And another thing that is often used is we talked about it before as well, the equating of critique of Israel is anti-Semitic, and that's something that that Sarah Schulman and Dr. Atchan and Sarah Schulman talk about in the book, and that I also talk about in the article. So we cannot continue to be silent, and also we cannot just speak up. We need to do more. We need to, with everything, we need to do more.
Thank you very much for the work that you do, and also for agreeing to speak with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That concludes my conversation with Axmed Maxamed, which was recorded on June 23rd, 2021. If you would like to learn more about Axmed and his work, you can follow him on Twitter at AxmedAmIinmax. And there's a link there to his link tree that links to all of the writing and cultural work that he's doing. I want to thank you very much for listening, and also thanks to Axmed again for talking with me today. You've been listening to Breaking the Waves, Conversations about the Dutch Pandemic.